Okay, good morning, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining this morning. Welcome to today's webinar, Diagnose Issues Within Your SQL Server Estate in 5 minutes or less. First, allow me to start with a couple of housekeeping items. All attendees are on mute during the webinar, but we want to hear your questions. So if you have any during the course of this presentation, please enter it into your question box and we'll make sure that we leave plenty of time at the end of the webinar to go through those. This webinar is also being recorded and we'll follow up with a copy of the recording as well as the slides over the next couple of days. The financial services industry is leading the charge, I feel, when it comes to speeding up innovation and adopting modern software delivery practices such as agile, continuous delivery, and DevOps. Although the financial industry was once seen as one of the slower adopters, I think executives in this conservative sector are now recognizing that DevOps is a great way to roll out value to the market. With those teams becoming faster, it's even more important to provide the tooling for the operations staff to keep up, to have visibility to your estate while still maintaining the integrity of production. So let's get started with some introductions and an overview of what you can expect from today's webinar. My name is Chris Ranvier. I'm a pre-sales engineer for Redgate Software. My contact information here below. Please reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. I've been with Redgate for just over 2 years, and as part of my role, I've helped hundreds of organizations implement DevOps best practices and streamline their delivery processes across their applications and databases, as well how to effectively monitor those SQL servers. In the finance sector in particular is where I started my career. I started in the financial district in Lower Manhattan, working for large financial institutions such as Citicorp, Fuji Bank, and American Express. So I'm quite familiar with some of the challenges that you face and how they differ from other industries. As I mentioned previously, financial firms are under increasing pressure really to release software faster in order to continue delivering value to your customers and remain competitive. But how are you keeping up with that speed? Do you have visibility to those releases, how they affect your SQL servers, to stay ahead of those issues, and if need be able to diagnose those issues in 5 minutes or less? For those of you who don't know Redgate, we've been around for just over 18 years, and our key focus is helping companies improve the quality and efficiency of their database development, primarily in SQL Server. But we also have a range of tools, including for the Oracle Suite, as well as .NET. I'll draw your attention quickly to a couple of points which might be of interest, and then we'll move on to the content for today's webinar. First, we have a huge presence in the community, sharing best practices, learnings, and helping to solve problems with the database community through our hubs, which you may be familiar with, SQLServerCentral.com, as well as Simple Talk. We have a huge focus on continuous delivery and improvements to our products. As a result, we've released over 1,000 major and minor product releases last year alone, a number which we see increasing year over year. And we're working currently with over 91% of the Fortune 100, as well as small startups, global organizations, and everything in between. Okay, let's get into SQL Monitor. Why is it necessary to monitor your SQL Server? In my opinion, and what I see in the space, I can break it down into three main topics. First and foremost, you need to have visibility to that SQL Server estate. You need to have the ability to track and acknowledge the constant changes that are occurring within that estate. And lastly, you want to be able to incorporate your monitoring solution into an overall DevOps methodology. Redgate SQL Monitor is a web-based monitoring tool. This helps teams looking after SQL Server environments to really be more proactive. Not only does SQL Monitor alert you to the current issue, it gives you the information that you need to stop them from happening in the future. Now, SQL Monitor even integrates with Redgate's deployment tools to allow for context to be given and tie it in more closely with our DevOps practices. And I'll go into that a little bit through the demonstration. A core goal of DevOps is really to break down organizational silos by bringing development closer to production. One way to foster this is ensuring that everyone shares the same understanding by having access to a shared monitoring platform. But DBAs typically have a deeper technical understanding of SQL Server than the developers working with it. This is one area where SQL Monitor's ease of use really shines. Being web based, there's nothing for a developer to install locally. It provides an intuitive visualization as well as in-tool guidance to make it far easier to understand what's going on than in competing tools. SQL Monitor also uses granular permissions, which makes it easy to grant teams or individual developers access to view data only for specific servers. To not only have the visibility to the most important piece of any financial firm's infrastructure, in my opinion, your SQL Server estate, but to proactively monitor those servers, not react to issues. Additionally, to performance tune those servers. These situations rely on our ability to have real time information on the state and activities of our database environments, and more specifically, database monitoring. How many of us have been in this circumstance in this room? I know I have. In the early days of my career, obviously, I think the bar was really just set at providing, 99.999% uptime. You could never go down. Mind you, this is all before failover clustering, VM replication, all of these kind of disaster recovery fail-safe measures. The fiscal impact back then of an unscheduled downtime was really calculated down to the minute. When an outage happened in my earlier days, our initial visibility to that issue was really from the end users, flooding the help desk with irate phone calls. We, as support folks and operators, had no idea on root cause because back then, really, the possibilities were endless. Was it a hardware failure? Just a junior admin spilling a cup of water on a server? Was it the operating system? Was it the SQL Server? Was it networking and so forth? Being able to successfully track changes to your environment was time consuming. The process was to work the problem and take each possibility out of the equation until you eventually get to root cause, and to try and do that as quickly as possible to minimize the firm's financial impact. What this culture really promoted was, just resolve the problem. Meaning, we really had no ability to track and acknowledge that change or what that issue was. We were all just happy that the users were back up and running. No real post-mortem, no understanding of root cause, no visibility really to even prevent it from occurring again in the future. The second key challenge I want to discuss is really the increasing volume of data, the speed of those application teams right now. For financial services companies, you're faced with that challenge of pressure to release software faster, along with the database changes. As releases are introduced, it becomes more difficult to maintain that visibility and to proactively monitor. Organizations that don't use the right monitoring tools will be unable to guarantee that they can provide high performing services, which can lead to obvious performance impacts to end users and even worse, our customers. According to our paper, The State of SQL Server Monitoring, the most frequently cited cause of problems in the financial industry were bad deployments, followed very closely by capacity problems. It's vital for financial organizations to reduce downtime. The cost, as I was saying, of an unplanned outage in the financial services industry is more than 2.5 times higher compared to other industries, according to Gartner. Some sources say as much as 110,000 per hour on average. In the ever competitive industry, today's financial institutions really can't afford those costly mistakes. If you have a bad deployment, for example, how fast can you see that? How can you be assured your performance impact is due to that bad deployment? Does your current monitoring solution provide that visibility? Can your solution provide immediate insights that allow you to get to the root cause with minimal effort? Adopting sound SQL Server monitoring practices has been proven to significantly reduce downtime with customers who utilize monitoring solution having 96 times faster mean time to recovery rate than those who do not. Okay, I'm going to take a look at SQL Monitor. I'm going to kind of go through a nice demonstration and really show you how we can assist with visibility, tracking, and resolving issues within your SQL Server estate. Okay, welcome to SQL Monitor. And I'm going to take you through a lot of different use cases here. What I would find to be important as a DBA who's monitoring. The first thing that I'm going to show you all first here is really the overview. And what this is really kind of coincides with that visibility that I'm talking about to provide the DBA a holistic overview of your entire estate here. And you can see all of my instances are being encapsulated by these dynamic cards. And what I mean by dynamic cards, you'll notice every so often, my machine pulls all of my instances. And if anything leaves a green state and reverts to a warning state or a critical alert, these cards will immediately populate to the top of your view, giving the operator, the DBA, immediate attention to where you can start to do an initial triage. You'll also notice within these cards, you have three categories here on the top level. You'll see your wait stats. You'll see your CPU utilization at any given time, as well as your disk IO. These three categories are very much important to a DBA without really diving into anything specific here to just get a good feel in terms of the overall performance of this particular instance. And you can see as you hover over any of those categories, you get a nice little interactive graph here showing you that representation. You can also, of course, really modify this view here based on alert type. So if I wanted to see everything that was going on in my environment, thankfully nothing critical here. But you can, of course, just with a simple checkbox, be able to see that view. You can also, of course, segregate that view based on environment. So, of course, if I'm just concerned with production, just a simple selection here to show me everything within that environment. Now, with one installation of SQL Monitor, we can monitor very comfortably about 200 to 225 SQL Server instances. Of course, that view starts to get a little convoluted, so you can reduce that view very simply here to a traditional thumbnail where you're just reviewing everything, making sure everything is green, and then, of course, hover over that if necessary to get back to that traditional card view. Over on the right hand side, this is also key to visibility in terms of your alerts. Okay, this is really, I think, the nuts and bolts of this product is the alerting capability. I can look at my alert history based over a very granular 15-minute window, or I can look at that from a perspective of a period of days. And I can also, again, segregate my alerts based on environment. So here I can see the type of alerts that are being captured by the product, how many times has that alert been triggered, what's the current status of that alert in terms of one of my teammates have acknowledged it, and if there's a help desk ticket that's been associated with it and so forth here. Uh, Really, just coming into this screen to get a quick glimpse in terms of an overall performance of my estate is something that I think is a godsend. And I often talk about my financial background in terms of my career here, just to kind of give you a little bit of laying of the table. Uh, in my days, I used to work in a shift, and I would do a 3 day on, 4 day off, 4 day on, 3 day off type of rotation. And when I would come back off of my rotation and come back into the data center, um, that first few hours was a turnover. And this is where my counterparts would give me everything that I needed to know to kind of hit the ground running. What were the open issues? What were the current situations? What did I really need to kind of pick up with during my term? And it was very tedious, obviously, and it was a waste of 2 hours. It did not really set the tone for a positive work week, as you can probably understand. So being able to kind of come into this tool and see this kind of glimpse here without having a very detailed turnover report just provides me more time to do traditional DBA work. I'm going to go through this product here and we'll kind of go through different use cases. We'll actually go through a scenario that I think is very common on an everyday DBA monitoring perspective here. So as you can see, first off, within my overview, you'll notice a couple of instances here within my production environment. In the upper right-hand corner, you have those AG representations. This is because these are a part of an availability group. So we have full support out of the box. If you are using any kind of availability group, this is where I can see all of my replications, making sure that, of course, everything is synchronized, any kind of log growth that might be occurring, any transaction delays, all out of the box. Most of my customers, if not all, have some sort of availability group or failover clustering as a part of their environment. I think a must have right now in terms of a monitoring solution. I'm going to take one of these instances, and then we're going to kind of take a walk through a day of in the life of a DBA, and how to go about looking at an issue and really getting to the root of a problem very quickly here. So I'm going to take my first instance over here. It's currently suffering a deadlock. When I select it, this type of data representation is presented to me in a very easily read format, kind of going about what I was talking about in terms of regardless of your seasoned career as a DBA or a junior DBA, being able to navigate this data and understand it, I think, is a key attribute to SQL Monitor. Now, the way that we are doing data collection here, we are going to be accessing 5 different data points. We access your perfmon counters. We go about getting your WMIs, your DMVs. We also use ping and query to encapsulate all of the data and present it in this fashion here. And as you can see within my instance, we are tracking your CPU utilization, your memory, your disk IO, as well as your weights. And you can, of course, remove all of these additional algorithms with a quick check on, check off here if you are in particular looking at specific issues like, for example, my CPU. One of the things I love about SQL Monitor is the ability to baseline. And this is something that really takes a lot of the legwork out and from an investigative standpoint, right? Let's kind of just piggyback here off of CPU usage. Um, it happens. It's a part of life in terms of SQL Server monitoring. But CPU usage or high CPU usage really can occur, for a various array of different reasons. Poorly written queries would be the first thing that I come across. High compilations and recompilations, high usage of the temp table, system threads causing high spikes in my CPU. There's just a lot of different ways to kind of start my investigation. By baselining here, I can really see through SQL Monitor's trending, what it perceives to be, excuse me, normal behavior versus an actual issue here. So if I have an impact from an end user bringing this to my attention or otherwise, I can really quickly see just with a check. I don't have to run any scripting against my servers and do comparisons between the two. Be able to really see commonality of behavior to kind of get my footing in terms of investigation. Over here next to the baselining feature is another attribute that is a must-have as far as I'm concerned. Going back in time, the ability to have this data be accessed, regardless if it's real time or not. I believe without a doubt, 50% of this job is always to discount or prove out SQL Server. And to do those investigations sometimes is always after the fact. So the ability to go back in time to a day of the week, a time of the day, and then have all of the data be presented back to me in terms of my CPU, my memory, my IO, my weights, what queries are being run, and so forth, is a godsend in terms of doing post-mortem work. I'm going to put all of these other algorithms back up, and then we'll kind of come back as well. As I kind of draw your attention to this graph, I also want to kind of call out a couple of different other areas here as well. Obviously, down here, you'll see these little visual representations. These are the actual alerts that you are tracking. But here you'll also notice this little icon here, and this kind of goes to what I was talking about in terms of tying this monitoring solution to the overall DevOps philosophy. Here is where you can track your deployments. If you're using our products on the front end, like SQL Change Automation or SQL Compare, to generate those update scripts that you're using to deploy through the higher environment, you now have a hook here within SQL Monitor to where I can pick those up. So from an understanding of what that post-release, pre-release behavior was, really again just goes to the value of this product. Let's go through a kind of a troubleshooting scenario, kind of showing how we can really diagnose this issue and get to root cause in 5 minutes or less. I'm going to remove all of the other heartbeats here and really just concentrate on the CPU. And I'm just going to take a specific area. Let's look at this guy over here. I'll kind of look at him. And you'll notice this little white box over here. This is what I would consider real time. All right. And I also liken this box to a magnifying glass because I can take this box and I can slide this box across this timeline. And when I release the mouse, the highlighted area is going to be indicative of everything that I'm going to see underneath in terms of the data. And I can, of course, take this and I can compress this and get very tight, very granular, right on an area that I might really want to concentrate on. Now, the first thing I want to kind of bring to your attention is the interactive graphs underneath here, in particular to CPU. So I've captured an alert from a CPU alert that I've established, or I could have been alerted to this by an end user. Either which way, I see it within the product. I bring my tool over, and now I can start to look at the data in terms of it. So the first thing that I notice on this interactive graph is actually where the spikes are occurring. And you'll notice that I have two different levels here. I have a machine level, and I have a SQL Server level. And the spike being captured here obviously is on the machine level. So from a kind of an initial triage standpoint, I'm getting my foot underneath me here from an investigative cadence. And now I know already that I'm going to start looking really on the machine level, more so on the SQL Server level, but allow me to maybe even look at it a little bit more intently. So I go ahead and I'll select that alert. And this will bring us over to an area where we start to get into an analysis, more of a comparative baselining feature now. I get a very dominant representation of the alert, as you can see here. Now, I want to go ahead and look at this instance at the exact same time 24 hours prior. So let me compare it to itself. And you'll notice in the rear, very shaded blue heartbeat here, kind of a trend. As you can see, obviously, I do have spiking that's occurring. It seems like at the same time every day. Really, the only difference here is the length of that duration. Let me extend it a little bit further past the 24 hours. Let me start looking at this now over periods of time, points of time. And you can see all of these different algorithms now become a little bit more harder to decipher. Let me switch it over to a regional view here. And now I can see kind of piggybacking off of that baseline feature that we saw previously. Now I can understand what the commonality of that behavior is. Yes, in fact, I am capturing a CPU alert. I do in fact see that it is spiking at said time. I've compared this instance to itself over 24 hours previous and even further back. And now I can really start to see a commonality of the CPU spiking. I do know that it's on my machine level. I do see it spiking. I see the duration of that spiking occurring. So now it really gets to a point of let's understand what's kicking off at this particular point. Let's start looking at root cause. And I want to mind you of really how fast I got here, guys and gals. In my day here, in my previous work life, to get to this point from a troubleshooting standpoint, probably would have taken me about an hour or two running scripts, comparing the perfmon counters to each other, trying to kind of get that behavioral down, trying to really get to where I even begin, which SQL Server to start to investigate with. I've gotten to this point here really with about 2 or 3 mouse clicks. That's really where I think the power of this tool comes into play, ease of use as well. And of course, the way that this data is being represented in a nice graphical format, you can of course always export this data to actual data for you guys to kind of go through a crunching if necessary. So now that I have this kind of information at hand, very simple now for me to go ahead and go to root cause. Let me go back into the overviews. Let me get back into my instance. I'll bring my magnifying glass back over to the point in time that I was concerned with here, remove all of the other algorithms that I might not be concerned with. Again, get a little bit more granular, make sure everything that I want to have from the perspective of data is being presented to me accordingly. And as I scroll down here, here is another attribute to just assist you all with respect to understanding what's been going on. With this product, we're giving you the top 10 queries and the top 10 weights. And of course, if you want to know more than the top 10, you can see the top 25 or the top 50 as well. But here I can see all of the different queries that we're running. I can also filter them, based on CPU, for example. Now I want to understand which of these queries was the one that was consuming the most CPU. I can take a look at a query plan here. I could see what all of my expensive operations were, all of my heavy duty operations, what the output was for each of those particular components. I can see the actual query. This is something that, from an investigative perspective, again, a godsend. I did not have this type of power when I was a full time operator. I can also take a look at an execution count, for example. And this is one of those attributes that I think SQL Monitor provides to the DBAs that goes one step above and beyond. So for example here, this particular query was the one that was executing the most. Let's take a look at it. I can take a look at this query plan. And here's one of those attributes that I think is fantastic, especially for those that are not seasoned DBAs. I can see the expensive operations and the heavy duty operations, but we'll also provide you some guidance here in terms of how to make this query a little bit more robust. And we'll give you the syntax to introduce into that query to perhaps improve the performance of that query uh, by, in this case, by as much as 80 some odd percent here. Fantastic piece to this tool that allows, regardless of your DBA experience, to really manipulate this tool and be an effective operator. As I scroll down, a lot of good data here in terms of understanding what's been going on with this instance, your latches, your locks, any network utilization that was going on, your disk usage, and so forth, as well as your blocking processes and your top user processes. So in this case here, I can move my mouse over to the left. I see a snap menu pop up. I can go down to processes. Again, I'm looking at this particular area here to really understand what was going on. And you can see both my SQL Server as well as my SQB core service were running. So quite honestly, in terms of understanding why my CPU has been spiking at this same exact time, day after day for an extended period, it seems that there's a backup job that is being kicked off at this particular time. So now I can either do a couple of different things. I can perhaps move my backup maybe a little bit later on into the day where I'm not exposing my end users to any kind of performance issues, or I could just give my end users just an alert that hey, there's backups that are kicking off. This is SQL Server, and I'm going to be backing this machine up a few times throughout a day, regardless. Just keep that in mind. The alerts. This is really, I think, one of the more powerful components to SQL Server and SQL Monitor. The type of alerts that we provide you all out of the box, I think we really do try and get as many of those that concern the DBA out of the box. And you can see here, you have your host machine alerts, I think disk space, obviously, processor utilization. Uh, I have an Azure footprint out there, and we'll talk a little bit about that shortly. But again, I want to notice what my CPU utilization is out there in my Azure environment, my DTU utilization, my SQL Server alerts, obviously deadlocking, blocking, long-running queries. And of course, you can customize these alerts as you see fit as well. This is something that I love about this product. You can stagger alerts as well. This is something that in my previous life, we didn't have. I would, in a data center, we acquired a lot of different companies in my days. And of course, I had a lot of different monitoring solutions that we would consume because of those acquisitions. And when you have a lot of different monitoring solutions, you might or might not be caring for them, updating those alerting thresholds and so forth here. And what that really started to create was, DBAs and operators were conditioned to really know what a real alert was versus what I would call a quote unquote fake alert. And also, by the time you would go into maybe a warning, it might have already been too late. I've already exposed either my end users or my customers to outages. To be able to stagger those alerts to kind of give you guys a little bit of a heads up, kind of a pregame to a real world scenario, is something that I find to be quite beneficial. As opposed to just waiting for things to go from green to red, give yourself a little buffer. Have an alert kind of stagger, give you a little bit of a preemptive strike to where you can kind of look at this query and make sure that it is in fact not going to get past this 50-minute threshold. Of course, also putting queries where you can exclude a lot of granularity here in terms of how to customize this alert is something that I find to be quite beneficial. Another piece to this alerting tool that I really like is where these alerts can get established. And as you can see over here, I can go ahead and drill down right to my server level, and I can go ahead and address any of these alerts and apply it at the highest level. I can branch it down and go to a specific database, and I can have my alerts trigger at the database level. I can also go down to the job level and have my alerts trigger there. And this really does reduce that noise. Okay, if you again have multiple monitoring tools out there, you really want to have your monitoring tool be as in tune with you and your infrastructure and your environment as possible. So when things do trigger, you can be assured these are actionable items, and for you guys to go ahead and start doing your triage. The alerts area here is also where you would see all of your different alerts that were coming in. In this case here, luckily I have no current alerts, but this would be kind of akin to an inbox. And this is where the operators and the DBAs can come in and see where all of the different alerts are being captured and to go about doing uh, whether they get cleared or not. The analysis tab. This is an area that I find to be quite interesting. The analysis tab really allows you to chart performance data on a wide range of key metrics. Um, for the monitored servers that we are looking at, as well as all of the databases. It also includes metrics that you can create as well, customized metrics, and we'll kind of get into that as well. You can show graphs containing multiple metrics to help understand really performance issues and problems. Compare the metric activity over different time ranges. Also using that comparative baselining feature that we were looking at when we were trying to understand what was going on with the CPU. The reporting area. Obviously, this is a necessity. There are going to be individuals, your C-level folks, for example, who require this kind of information to make budgetary decisions and so forth, as well as just keeping everybody collaborative and visible to what's going on in the environment. So the way that we're doing this data collection and presenting it over to those folks that are not full-time DBAs is necessary. And of course, you can customize these reports with SQL Monitor. And the way that you do that, we call these tiles in the background. And kind of going back to the analysis tab, all of those different metrics you can see here. I have machine level metrics. I have SQL Server metrics, database metrics, again, my cloud, Azure, my AG metrics, VMware, and so forth. And again, if I wanted to, for example, understand what my guest CPU ready time is, if I have some data here, I can go about just establishing it. Let me find one that has actual information for us. Four times the charm. There we go. Just fill out the the walkthrough here, select all of the different volumes that might be of concern, and then just simply add that to your overall reporting feature. You can hover over any of these and then get a little bit more of a detailed look. For example, here, and we're just giving you kind of a snapshot in terms of the reporting. Your instances with your lowest uptime. You also have fastest filling disks. And if you hover over this here, you can see what your current capacity is. And then also because SQL Monitor is gauging your change rate, your data change and your growth rates, we're giving you kind of also a little glimpse in terms of how many days you have available before you're dealing with those full capacity disks. Longest running queries. And what you're looking at here also, folks, is the top five, okay? So regardless of how many instances we're monitoring with SQL Monitor, we're just going to show you the top five that might be of concern to you all. A nice little, again, compressed look of your alert history based over a period of time. How many of alerts were we capturing that were of high level versus low? What type of alerts were we capturing? And a trend as well in terms of, are we seeing an uptick here in terms of deadlocking and blocking, as well as instance waits by day. This is something, just a kind of a glimpse as to what really you can do with reporting. Of course, being able to export all this information off as a PDF, establishing a cadence in terms of emailing this report off daily, weekly, what have you. Of course, and also encapsulating this report based on a couple of different levels here. I can compile a report every half day, or I can, of course, compile it over a period of a month and have that information disseminated out. The estate tab, this is something where we are moving, I think, and we see a trend here. And this is something that I often really have a soft spot for because in my day, really, this was busy work for me. This was necessary to keep information about our estate in terms of, my SQL Server accounts, what versions of SQL Server am I running? Are they up to date? Do I have a service pack available to download? Am I in support or am I out of support? All of this being compiled by SQL Monitor. This was an Excel spreadsheet for me back when I was coming up. 4 hours of my work week at the minimum, updating that spreadsheet. It was everybody's ball and chain, quite honestly. It was not something fun. To kind of allow this to be encapsulated in this fashion, again, freeing up that kind of workload, allowing me to do traditional DBA work versus busy work. The configuration tab, obviously, this is where we configure this product to really be in tune with your world there. This is where we, of course, add all of the monitored servers. We can do those monitored servers or adding those servers via server name or clustered name or a bulk upload. Uh, we also have VMware host integration, so bring in those hypervisors as part of this monitoring tool as well. And we'll take a look at your CPU utilization, your disk I/O as it pertains to your vCenter or your ESXi hosts. Tracing, extended events, obviously must-haves from a monitoring solution. Authentication, those models are, of course, most of my customers, if not all now, are just using straight Active Directory to do that authentication. This allows a lot more control for your teams. Who gets access to this tool? What can they do within this tool with that access? Can they add alerts? Can they clear alerts and so forth? What visibility do they have when they log in and so forth? As I was saying, giving development that kind of control, that visibility to where they can effectively see the effects of what they're doing with their code changes. And then lastly, over here, the customize area, we kind of touched on this just briefly. And this is really what I think separates Redgate SQL Monitor from the rest of the pack out there. What you're looking at here is a repository of customized alerts. These alerts were compiled either by the development team here at Redgate, our Microsoft MVPs we have on staff, customer asks, and so forth. If you have the ability, to really write T-SQL, you can go ahead and introduce those as a part of your build of SQL Monitor and have your own, um, you know, unique alert that's particular to your environment. Principles, for example, with sysadmin login, this is probably something we don't want to have happening out there. Who has that kind of access and who's logging in with that kind of access? Here's the T-SQL. And if these alerts, and this is a customer facing site here, folks, you can always go to this repository and take a look at all of these alerts. If they make sense, just, go ahead and install that metric. For folks that have bought SQL Monitor and have come across this area, and there's nothing within that repository that really coincides with what they're trying to accomplish, this goes to really what Redgate does with that customer relationship out there. Come to us afterwards and let us know what that attribute is from that alert standpoint, and we'll go ahead and write that T-SQL for you. Something that I think that really, uh, again, separates Redgate from the rest. Okay, let's get back into the actual webinar. Okay, so we've done a case study here. The German IT service provider, Fiducia and GADIT, they provide systems over there that power about 36,000 ATMs at about 80 million different bank accounts as well over in Germany. Last year, they implemented our SQL Monitor to better manage the performance of their growing SQL Server estate, delivering the better customer satisfaction as well as driving growth for their business. They had a further addition of 150 servers expected this year, and the DBAs were really forced to consider either hiring more folks or invest in a third party tool. Since they implemented SQL Monitor, Fiducia and GAD have been able to scale the operations at an unprecedented rate. They've introduced those 150 new servers, as well as 70 to 80 new applications so far this year. Managing this increase in servers would typically require additional support or jeopardize the quality. However, Redgate's solution has enabled the DBA teams to remain the same size while also quickly alerting them to those performance issues and allowing the team to be more proactive. The team there now has more knowledge and confidence that they're delivering the high standard of service that their customers expect. I'm going to move into any questions and answers. Let me take a look and see if we have any questions out there. And I often get this question a lot here. How is this product licensed? This is, I think, what I hear every day when I'm talking about SQL Monitor with the account teams. SQL Monitor is licensed per operating system, and I'll often do a prefacing statement here that when I talk about licensing, I often always defer to the account teams because this is their lane, obviously. But again, per operating system, there is no pricing challenges in terms of if you're monitoring active or passive nodes as well. That too could be discussed with your account representative. I'm sure there's some pricing advantages there as well for that question. I think this question was already answered during the demonstration. How does SQL Monitor do that data collection? Again, if those of you who did not hear were accessing your WMIs, your perfmon counters, your DMVs, and lastly, ping and query. I also want to kind of piggyback off of that. I don't know if I mentioned this before. This is an agentless solution, SQL Monitor, so we're not installing anything on your SQL servers. So there's no kind of performance resource impact or potential impact, I should say, because you're running third-party agents on your servers out there. I have another question here just with respect to SQL Monitor as it pertains to Azure or AWS. Good question. And thank you for that question. So how do I set up SQL Monitor and Azure or AWS? Allow me to go back into SQL Monitor here. I'm going to go back in here. Let me get into the configuration area. Okay, and down here you'll see base monitor connection. Okay. Now the way that we would set up, you know, SQL Monitor out there in the cloud, first and foremost, we're going to require a VM on that same virtual network, either within your failover cluster instance or your availability group. And I'll go ahead and add an additional SQL Monitor within that footprint here. Okay. And this is one of those attributes that I think is fantastic, not just if you're moving from a physical on-prem environment out to a cloud infrastructure, but even if you have a very robust environment, as I was saying, one instance of SQL Monitor can really monitor about 200 or so instances simultaneously. But if you're looking for maybe some load balancing from that aspect, this is also another, I think, a nice fit for an additional base monitor. Segregate that workload, even though I'm in the same physical network per se. Maybe have 100 come to this base monitor, have another 100 come to that base monitor. Excuse me, and then have all of them simultaneously be monitored in that way. And you do not require multiple panes of glass. You can have all of those base monitors be able to encapsulate whatever they are monitoring, and then have that full spectrum of monitoring be here in the overview tab. So I don't have to have multiple different instances to look at, regardless of where that base monitor is installed. Good question. Those were the only questions that I saw in the question box. Um, I want to thank everyone for their time this morning. Ideally, if you need to have any kind of contact with us, please, you can see webinars at redgate.com as our email address. As well, please visit our website. If you know anything about us, I think we're doing a lot of exciting things in terms of both sides of the house, both on the development side as well as the operational side. If there's any kind of need there, any kind of recommendations that we can provide, regardless of where you all are in terms of this process of achieving DevOps, please reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to do one-on-one sessions with you all through this kind of environment through GoToMeeting or WebEx, or we'll go on site depending on really what works best for the customers out there. Again, if there's any way to contact me, feel free to contact me through the my LinkedIn account. But again, thanks for all the time today, this morning. I had a great time speaking with everyone. This recording will then be dispersed out there in a couple days, as I was saying, for future uh, follow-up. Thanks everyone for joining.